You've seen the scene 100 times. Eni's lobby, the gates of justice, the flag on fire, but I want you to forget the action for a second. Forget the buster call, forget the water flooding in, forget the marine warships, and just sit with this one image. A girl, finally breaking down and admitting she wants to live. I want to live. 3 words. The most powerful moment in one piece. And if you ask most people why it hits so hard, they'll say friendship, nakama, found family. But that's not the real reason. And by the end of this video, I think you'll see this crew completely differently. Because here's what we never talk about. Nico Robin had spent her entire life, not part of it, her entire life, believing the world was right to throw her away. And the reason that scene works? It's not because Luffy is her friend. It's because he was the first person in 22 years who looked at that belief and refused it. That's not friendship. That's something older, something heavier. So today we're not talking about nakama. We're not talking about bonds or brotherhood or found family. We're asking a different question entirely. What is the Straw Hat crew actually built on? And the answer, I think, is going to make you see every single one of them differently. Luffy doesn't build a crew. He collects everyone the world threw away. We've been calling it nakama for years. And look, that word isn't wrong, it just isn't deep enough, because nakama describes what the crew becomes. It doesn't explain what the crew is built from. And what it's built from is wreckage. Go through every straw hat and ask yourself one question. Not what happened to them, but what was done to them, deliberately, by systems and people who were supposed to protect them. Zoro was left to rot in a marine base, waiting to be executed, with nobody coming. Nami's village made a transaction. Arlong needed money, and she was the currency. Robin had a bounty of 79 million berries placed on her head at 8 years old, not for anything she did, but for surviving. And Brooks spent 50 years alone on a ship full of corpses in a foggy, cursed sea with no way out. The world didn't just fail these people, it made a decision. It looked at each one of them and said, "You are not worth keeping." And then Luffy showed up. Here's the thesis, and I want you to hold it for the rest of this video. The Straw Hat crew is not held together by shared goals or friendship or even loyalty. It's held together by a shared understanding of what it feels like to be left. Every one of them knows that feeling, so none of them will do it to each other. Now, let's talk about the ones the world threw away, and we're going to start with the one you definitely didn't expect, because it's Zoro. I know, your first instinct is to push back. Zoro doesn't read as abandoned. He reads as solitary by choice. He's cold, self-sufficient, allergic to vulnerability. He's the guy who will get sliced to pieces before he admits he needs anyone. But go back to before Luffy found him. Really go back. Zoro is tied to a post in a marine base. He made a deal, stay and wait, and they'll let a child go free. He kept his end. And now he's sitting there days later, waiting to be executed in the middle of nowhere. And nobody is coming, not because they don't know, because they don't care. The world decided Zoro was a problem to be contained and eventually eliminated. No crew, no affiliation, no protection. Just a pirate hunter the system had decided was worth nothing once he stopped being useful. And Zoro, who built his entire identity around needing no one, who made I Will Never Lose Again into a religion after Kuina died, was about to die alone in a courtyard, proving he was right not to trust anyone. Then a rubber idiot crashed through the wall. And here's the thing, Zoro joining the crew isn't about inspiration, it's simpler and more devastating than that. Luffy showed up, that's it. For a man who had been left, the entire bar was someone who doesn't leave, which is exactly why, at Thriller Bark, when Zoro had the choice to let Luffy carry his own pain, he didn't. He took all of it, every drop, and stood up covered in blood and told Mihawk's apprentice that nothing happened. That's not strength. That's a man who was left once, who decided he would never be the person who does the leaving. But Zoro's abandonment, as brutal as it was at least a failure of a system. What happened to Nami? That was something more personal, more deliberate, and honestly harder to forgive. Nami's abandonment is the most literal of all of them. It wasn't a system that failed her, it was the people around her, watching and deciding the math worked out. She was 8 years old when Bellemere, the only person who had ever truly chosen her, died rather than deny that Nami was her daughter, not out of obligation, out of love. Bellemere could have walked away, she chose not to, and that choice cost her everything. And immediately after, the village watched a child walk into Arlong's service and did nothing, because for them the numbers added up. Think about what that does to a person. The one person who loved you unconditionally is gone, and the community that was supposed to hold you watched and calculated and went home. So Nami became her own system. She drew maps, she hoarded berries, she built a wall so high around herself that by the time we meet her, she's already mastered the thing she learned at 8 years old. Love will cost you. Transactions, she can control. And then Luffy, this person with no money, no strategy, no understanding of consequences, takes off his hat, his most sacred possession, the one physical tie to Shanks, the man who shaped his entire dream, and he puts it on her head. He doesn't make a deal, he doesn't ask for anything back. He just puts the hat on her head and goes to fight a man she's been terrified of for years. Nami cries in that moment not because she's relieved, she cries because she had completely forgotten, after years of transactions and survival math, that a person could just choose her without conditions. The world sold her once, Luffy refused the currency, but as devastating as Nami's story is, the abandonment there is human, understandable in the worst possible way. What happened to Robin is different, because the institution that threw her away was the entire world. Robin is where this thesis becomes undeniable. She was 8 years old when Ohara was destroyed. The world government sent a Buster Call, their highest level of military force, to destroy an island of archaeologists whose only crime was reading history, and in the middle of that obliteration a child ran, alone, across burning water, while every adult who had ever protected her was killed, and the world decided that child was a threat, a bounty of 79 million berries, at 8 years old, not for anything she did, for what she knew, for what she could become. The most powerful government in the world looked at a traumatized orphan and issued an extermination order. For the next 22 years, Robin ran. Every crew that offered shelter, betrayal, or destruction, every organization she joined, eventual collapse. She learned through systematic and painful repetition that the safest move was to expect abandonment, stay useful, stay disposable, never ever believe that someone would fight for her. She joined the Straw Hats as a calculated decision. She had nowhere else to go. And then Enies Lobby happened. Luffy declared war on the world government. He didn't do it to prove anything. He didn't do it for strategy. He did it because Robin said she wanted to die, and he refused to accept that. He looked at 22 years of the world, telling her she wasn't worth saving, and he burned their flag. The "I want to live" scene hits the way it does because Robin isn't just asking to survive. She's asking for the first time whether she's allowed to want things, whether her existence is something she's permitted to value. And Luffy's answer was a declaration of war on the people who told her otherwise. The world abandoned Robin for knowing too much. Luffy kept her for exactly who she was. And we're almost done, but I saved the most devastating one for last, because Zoro was abandoned by a system, Nami by her community, Robin by the world itself. But Brook was abandoned by time, and that's somehow the one that gets me every single time. Brook's crew died in the Florian Triangle, all of them, poisoned weapons one by one until only he was left, and then he died too, except his devil fruit brought his soul back, and his soul wandered the fog until it found his body again, now fully skeletal, on a ship full of corpses with no way out. He spent 50 years there, 50 years, alone on a ship in permanent fog, talking to nothing, playing music for people who couldn't hear it anymore. The only thing keeping him moving was a promise that he would find his way back to a whale named Laboon at Reverse Mountain, a promise his whole crew had made before they died. The promise wasn't just sentimental, it was structural. It was the reason the days had a shape. And here's what wrecks me about Brook. The world didn't abandon him through cruelty or calculation or policy. It abandoned him through pure indifference. Nobody knew he was there. Nobody came looking. He just existed alone for 50 years in fog on a ship that was slowly rotting beneath him. When the Straw Hats find him, Brook has been alone longer than most of the crew has been alive, and the first thing he asks, before anything else, is whether he can join, not because they're strong, not because they have a plan, because there are voices on his ship that aren't his own, because after 50 years of silence, people showed up. Brook became the crew's musician. Every single day, he plays for them, with everything he has, because he understands, in a way none of the others quite do, what a ship sounds like when there's no one left to play for. The world left Brook alone in the dark for 50 years. The Straw Hats just showed up with a lantern. Now I know what some of you are thinking, and it's a fair point. Every shonen crew has tragic backstories. Fairy Tail, Naruto, Sad Pass are basically the template. So what makes One Piece different? Here's the distinction, and it matters. In most shonen, the tragic backstory is fuel. It explains why the character fights. It gives them motivation. Here's the wound. Here's how it makes them stronger. Here's how they eventually overcome it. The backstory exists to be conquered. Oda doesn't use the wound as fuel. He uses it as architecture. The wound doesn't explain why each Straw Hat fights. It explains why they cannot leave each other. It's not motivation, it's structure. These people are held together by the specific shape of what each of them lost. They recognize each other's damage, not through conversation, not consciously, just they know, the way that people who have been left recognize each other without needing to say anything about it. And crucially, the wounds don't get solved. Nami still flinches. Robin still shuts down when things get hard. These aren't healed backstories. These are people who are still carrying something, and the crew is the reason they don't put it down and stop walking. Here's what I want to leave you with. Luffy is not a good captain because he's strong. He's not a good captain because he gives speeches or has a vision or understands strategy. He famously understands none of those things. Luffy is a good captain because he genuinely cannot process the idea that a person could be disposable. It doesn't register. When he sees someone the world threw away, there's no calculation. He just picks them up. The Straw Hats are not a story about broken people who found each other and got fixed. They're a story about broken people who decided together to keep moving. Robin still carries O'Hara. Brook still carries 50 years of silence. They are all, on some level, still the person the world threw away, but they're carrying it on the Thousand Sunny, together. And here's the thing I genuinely can't shake. Whatever Roger found at the end of the Grand Line that made him laugh at his own execution, whatever the One Piece actually is, I think the Straw Hats are already holding something like it. They just don't know yet that that's what it's called.